Cecilia, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
Hi, good and you?
I'm doing perfecto. We could use a little Spanish here if we wanted to.
Un poquito.
Un poquito, because my Spanish is rusty. I was just say I use it. I probably text more, just via WhatsApp, because there's a people and friends and like just adopted family I have now.
I mean, if it's rusty, there's only one way to change that.
Gotta use it unless you lose it. And so you can be my teacher. You can be my tutor.
Of course.
But I'm really excited to have you on here. One, just because I don't know you personally, so I want to get to know you better, but also about the work. And like I want other Nashvillians to know about like this, your story, your journey, and how you came to do what you do and the impact that you currently have on Nashville, in the immigrant community, Latinx community, and just the overall community, right? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, my name is Cecilia Prado. I use she, her pronouns. I was born and raised in a small town in Mexico called Monclova, Coahuila. It's in the north, in the middle of the desert.
Okay.
And it is not known for much, except for the fact that there is a steel mill plant that produces the most steel in Latin America.
Oh, wow.
And at the peak of its time, it was a big industrial region where a lot of immigrants from different parts of Mexico, or even folks coming from the United States, were coming, right? So for a better economic opportunity. So I come from a multi-generational indigenous family. My grandfather was Kickapoo and my grandma is Huichol.
Wow.
The Kickapoo come from the Great Lakes region in North America, so around Wisconsin, more or less. And my grandma is from Huichol, which is a tribe in central Mexico. And so they ended up in Monclova because of displacement that, continues to happen to indigenous communities. And there was money to be made in the steel company, right? And so I grew up through them. Because steel was such an important resource in Mexico, there was also a very radical and vibrant labor movement of steel workers. So my grandfather was a steel worker, my uncles were steel workers, and some of them still work for the steel company. And so since I was a little girl, they taught me how to also create some disruption using the power that you have, as workers.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a rich history, and it's good that you know it, right? Many of us don't have the privilege of knowing that ancestry, that history of other tribes and nations that our families derive from. And that's awesome. That's crazy. Dang. And so did you get to hear some stories from your grandparents about how it was and the indigenous and the native things that were practiced?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, it is a deep privilege to know exactly and to have that connection with the ancestors. Mm-hmm. A lot of those stories are also stories of trauma, so there is that complexity that we hold. I know that, for example, for my grandfather, many generations before him were displaced. And his father died to his land before it was going to be taken over by an American company and turned into a hydroelectric plant.
Wow.
So just thinking through that and thinking where I come from and the things that my family has had to do for generations, it's a deep privilege to be connected to the ancestors, but it's also, it just gives you an idea of the magnitude of the harm that our people have experienced for centuries.
Right. So what brought you to the United States? How did that journey happen?
So that was, I had the opportunity in 2009 to come to study, study college here. And I took it. At that time, 2009 was a period of a lot of violence in Mexico. Mm-hmm. The cartels, there was this cartel called the Zetas that was growing in its power, and They are notoriously known for being quite violent and for staging big violent acts to scare people. And at that time, they took over my town, and things were getting very dangerous. So I never grew up in my father's family, and they were better positioned than my mom's were, right, as a family of steel workers. And on the side of my family, of my dad, I never really had a relationship, but he showed up. He said, I am willing to pay for your college education as a way to build some kind of relationship between us. Do you take it? And I said, yes. So I went to the University of Massachusetts, which is where I really, really ended up facing some of the structural issues in the United States, which are similar but a different flavor.
So, yeah, let's get straight into it. And so backstory for myself. And so you really never know what other countries are learning or what you really know about other people until you visit their home, their country, I say, right? And so when I had the opportunity to live in Latin America and South America and Central America, I really learned a lot about like just the Latin culture, Latin people, but also what they thought about me, right? And some stereotypes that I had wrong about them, right? And so I'm curious, going to University of Massachusetts, Boston, right?
Amherst. So rural Massachusetts.
rural Massachusetts, right? And Boston is known to just be a very racist place in general, right? What was your experience like? First off, because I want to talk about this a little later on. Your language, was that a barrier for you? Because I know I've been on the other side of that, and so yeah. So how was trying to adjust to learning English? Did you know a little? Did you have any grasp of it before you came?
So in theory, I knew a little bit of English. I passed some tests, that were supposed to measure your English proficiency, and I passed those, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to go to college in the United States. I was not. Oh my goodness. So it actually took me about 5 years to graduate, 6 years to graduate college.
That's typical for those who do speak
a different language.
But what's crazy is I think maybe the average, like even if you're a U.S. citizen, graduate like 5 or 6 years. So that's not really that bad for a person who came in not knowing like the language. So kudos to you.
I think, the language is one part, and right. It was definitely like the culture shock is another.
Right.
Everybody in Latin America, we say hi, kissing each other's cheeks, and so I tried to do that the first day. Didn't play out very well, but, on a deeper level, I think emotionally, I don't know if that was something I could have been more prepared for. I wasn't done processing some of the violence that I had seen in Mexico during the peak years of the drug war in my region, and was still not done processing a lot of the harm that I experienced myself. Right. And then I come to this new country where I don't really speak the language, and I start seeing how racist academia is here, especially in the United States. Right. It's incredibly racist, and the lack of trust that I got from my professors, the lack of empathy. I, was 3 out of my 6 years of college. I was 3 years out of the 6. I was in a deeply abusive relationship. And that also ended up radicalizing me as a person. I learned a lot about myself during that time. I learned a lot about myself as a person of color in the United States. I learned about myself as an Indigenous queer woman in the United States, as, just about the different systems that play out, because I feel like I experienced so much in such a small amount of time.
So, before we dig in even more, I'm always curious to ask this question, especially for people who come to the United States from other countries, right? How did you understand racism before coming to the United States?
I think it was deeply based on my experiences. I was always, we like to think of Latin America as this homogenous culture of people, right. And it's actually not true. Latin America is just a geographic region. Saying that you are Latinx doesn't quite begin to address the complexity, right, in the different races that do exist. And in fact, one of the most damaging myths among Latin Americans is the fact that everybody seems to believe that we're all mixed, especially with white, that we're all mixed with white, and therefore right. we are beyond racism. And if you ask somebody from Mexico, they might tell you, well, Mexico is classist, not racist. It's all about the money. When that's not true. That right. is a myth that is used to turn a blind eye to the continuous genocide and exploitation of Black and Indigenous people living in Mexico. Right. And it also creates a lot of a very insidious form of internalized racism, because right. even people of color that noticeably are Indigenous or are Black, they can use that myth to separate themselves from their race and their people, and right. It creates a very insidious type of internalized racism. So I didn't fully understand it till I got to the United States. Right, because you know it exists in other places, but it may not be the same type of racism or the same type of colorism or classism, right? Is this white supremacy has affected everything. And depending on where you come from or where you're born or where you grow up or your bubble that you're in, you might view it differently. So I'm always just curious when people, especially like yourself, do this work, and then like in the United States, but coming from another country, like, oh, I wonder like what was before you got entrenched in this type of racism and this shit that we got here in the United States, like. I wonder, how did you conceptualize it then and now? And so that was a great breakdown. I mean, I didn't really have a grasp. I definitely did know how patriarchal Mexico is, because I was a queer femme in Mexico, and that's something that you cannot ignore in a country that is very sexist, right. with our own flavor of sexism, the machismo, right. of Mexico. And I was relieved to come to the United States. I picked the area of Massachusetts that I picked because I know it had some of the highest amounts of queer femmes in the country. So right. I was like, I want to go there. Right. I did my research. Right. No, like you have to though, like, because you want to feel safe. You want to feel like you can learn and grow and be comfortable in your own skin and your body and with your own identity and who you are. So one of the things when I travel, one of the things that Black people and such and such, like let's be realistic, it's not the same experience for people who may not identify with the majority. And exactly. So no, like you have to do that. Like that's just smart. Of course. But I mean, when we're talking about race, that is something that honestly, for the first 6 years or so, like it was a constant experience of gaslighting. Until I realized a lot of different things and started becoming more aligned and with my identity, and went through a whole process to liberate myself of some of those. So, what are some of the things that you might have struggled with the most that maybe somebody that's looking at this is in, a similar situation or just got here to the United States, maybe in school, and trying to figure it out, like how the culture shock. What are some navigation kind of tools or methods that you can give that person from your experience in Massachusetts when you're doing that first initial 6 years? I think that really have a grasp of where you come from and who you are, and then find your people. And I think that being in deep community with our people, it felt, the first time I experienced that, some of the first times I've experienced that, it was like a whole weight off my shoulders. Like, this is the validation that I have been seeking for. Your feelings are valid. Your reality is your reality.
Right.
Don't question it. It's real. And that ultimately I cannot imagine healing from that outside of a community of our people.
How did you find your community while you was in Massachusetts during that time?
Well, first I was incredibly angry about everything that had happened to me. I just knew I had anger. So the first emotion that, got me in that journey was anger. I remember being angry at my teachers for basically not showing me respect, or just straight up being harmful. I remember being angry, working at a high school with ESL students who are immigrant, immigrant youth that were also experiencing similar things. And I remember being angry. I remember, the domestic violence, like nonprofit organizations being run by upper class white women, and I remember being angry because I needed that resource, but I don't feel comfortable in that space, right? Or using that. So I started to think through and started obsessing over the resources that I needed that I couldn't access because perhaps they were led by upper class white people, and started to get connected to local organizations or to national organizations. And one thing led to another, and I ended up coming in contact with a worker center in Western Massachusetts, and that's really one of the first times where I felt at home.
Well, I'm glad that you found that community because, again, coming to a new country, trying to figure out the language, trying to find community, I don't think many people really understand how difficult that really is. And when I say many people, I think just Americans in general, unless you've had an experience, a unique experience where you had to live in the country, immerse, learn the language, and then I remember when I did Peace Corps going to Paraguay, and this is with support, right? This is this is through the government in a way, right? But just being not being able to express myself. Just simply because I literally didn't have the words, right? Or even just things getting lost in context because of culture differences, right? And just damn, but it made me have a different lens for immigrants or refugees that came to the United States, because especially here in the South, where you hear we don't want immigrants, so you hear these things growing up and you say, dang, what's the issue? Okay, well, are they doing something harmful? But until you're into their shoes, kind of and kind of can understand. I say kind of because it's different me going there to volunteer than being an immigrant and uplifting your life, right? And it really made me open my eyes. Okay, so yeah, this person is not a janitor or working as a secretary because they really want to. That person may be a lawyer in their country, but literally they don't have the vocabulary to be a lawyer here in the United States or a doctor here in the United States. So I always after that moment, I always seen immigrants and refugees in a different light, and more brave than anything, and courageous.
And which immigrants too?
Yeah. That too. Again, my own growing and learning. When I hear the word immigrant, I think I was conditioned and trained at that particular time to automatically think Latinx community. Automatically, for some reason, as immigrants, I had Pratik on here. And he was like, well, we have a hell of a lot of undocumented Asian Indians here, but that doesn't come to my mind, right?
Yeah.
That's not what's pushed. or whatever. But so yeah, that's a great question.
Which immigrants, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that people have an issue with Black and Indigenous people. And it has been, the main system that was put in place by colonialism quite literally necessitates violence against Black and Indigenous people to be able to survive.
Right.
And a lot of the immigrants that are coming from Latin America, they are indigenous folks. That are, if we're thinking about Nashville, that's mostly Mayan folks, right? That are coming because there are a lot of Western multinational corporations that are destroying their land in Guatemala right now, destroying it to put, to harvest palm oil, or hydroelectric companies or mining companies. They're destroying their whole ecosystems, which is causing the natural disasters to have worse effects than they would have, right? Because they're removing some of those natural barriers that would, reduce the harm. I don't know if I explain that very well, but basically, folks are coming here because the same colonization and the same exploitation, imperialism, are displacing them from their land. So where are they gonna go? Indigenous people in the Americas have been traveling the whole continent for centuries, way before colonization.
Right. So, and I want to get on two things. I want to talk about how you got started in building community and some of your work in Massachusetts, and then I'm gonna ask the next question after that, because I'm always curious about this, but I'm gonna reveal it once you tell me, how did you start? Once you started working on yourself, right? How did you start working with other community and building community in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I knew things had to change. I was angry. I knew things had to change. So I started looking for organizations in which I could, be part of the creation of something different that wasn't there before. I started, as an intern with the ACLU of Massachusetts. And this was around, 2016. So Trump had gotten elected, and there was all this conversation about immigrants, and the ACLU, had an immigrant protection project. So I went on, and it wasn't quite what I was looking for. I noticed that we will go to the detention centers, we will collect people's intakes, and then the lawyers will sit down and have a discussion after and discuss which cases to take.
Right.
And most of the time they wouldn't take a case because perhaps they were looking for a case that would create a statement or a case that was very easy to win.
Right.
And I just felt disheartened because I was meeting all of these quality human beings that were in detention, and with most of them we just say goodbye, and we never did anything beyond that. And to me, it just didn't sit right with me. Then I started volunteering at the Pioneer Valley Worker Center, which is a worker center in Northampton, Massachusetts, that organizes farm workers and food chain workers. Okay. And as soon as I came in, this was also, I was with other immigrant folks like myself, but instead of just taking intakes and doing this transactional relationship, it was completely different. We sat down the first time in a circle, and you just see immigrant folks that were very empowered, and they were learning how to solve their own problems and how to be in community with each other. And as soon as you enter the room, the energy, it was like, okay, this is it. That's the stuff. And so I have been, at the moment, I was actually doing research in microbiology, which was a little,
Microbiology?
Yeah. So I was working at Amherst College doing some research, studying bacteria, and then I started volunteering at the Pioneer Valley Worker Center. And then I started volunteering a lot more, where at that point it was just taking over all of my free time.
Okay. You're a great organizer, right? I would say. you know, I think you're a great organizer from what I've seen you do here in Nashville, and then just some of the research. I know, like you went through the process, right? Um, you know, in your home country, there's a lot of, like any other place, there's a lot of issues, right? And there's solutions to these issues, but to these things, they need powerful people, right? To move on these things. And I'm always curious, and this is, I'm gonna tell you the reason why I am so curious, and this is the reason why, and the reason why I'm posing this question. I was teaching ESL once I returned back from Peace Corps, because I was so moved and understood this language justice, right? I didn't know the term at the time, but that's what I was doing. I understand, like, this stops a lot of things from happening, right? I need to get involved, right? I just experienced it myself, just not knowing the language, and I had to grow and learn it. And so let me help other folks that I know that are coming here from the United States, the majority of those folks being from Central America, right? And so I had build relationships, teaching them English, mostly women. And we started to get closer. We started to ask more just questions about things, right? And then we got into the race part, right? We got into the race part, and they said, "Hey, Jerome, you know, why are black people so lazy, right?" And thank God for my travel experience, because I could have took that a different way, right? But we had a relationship, and so I had to break down to them, like, "Hey, this is a situation." Just historically with black folks that I don't think you have a grasp of, and then systemically, these are some of the things, right? And I tried to do this in English and Spanish, so hopefully it came across, right, right. And I think they took it okay. I think they took it okay. And the question I have for you, once I had that conversation a few times, right? I always ask myself. Now, but I'm asking you, why don't people like yourself, even if you come to the United States, you get educated, and you learn and you build, why not go back to Mexico or your home country, and in knowing that you have maybe similar or the same issues, especially whether it's combating white supremacy, racism, discrimination, whatever it may be. Why don't you go back to your home country and build power with your people, just like Black Americans have had to do? One, many of us don't have anywhere else to go, so this is our home country, right? This is our home country, so we couldn't escape and leave and run if we wanted to, right? But why don't educated, powerful, strong leaders, and I'm just using Mexico because you're here, that maybe from Mexico go back and do their work in their country that they may be doing here in the United States?
Ooh. Well, I ask myself that question a lot.
Not to say that we don't want you here.
No.
That's not to say that, because the more people building power is, regardless where you are, is good work. But I'm always curious. I'm always just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of several ways to look at it. One, we are very close to the problem here. The problem being white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism. I mean, the United States is a bully, and the United States hasn't led my country. And technically, like if I'm gonna speak as a Latinx woman, our countries.
Right.
The United States hasn't let us do our thing.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of people in our countries understand that this country needs to change for us to be able to have an opportunity. That's the way that we see it.
Okay.
Number two, my people are here because my people are indigenous people that have been displaced, that have gone to, we lose our sense of land and our sense of home. It gets distorted and it gets into, we all have that shared experience. So in a way, I am organizing with my people, who many of don't really have a way to go. When we're talking about Mexico, I think a lot about who should be leading. I am an Indigenous femme, but I don't practice the traditions of my ancestors in the way that my grandfather did. I don't know it. So I need to look at who is doing the work in Mexico. For example, the Zapatistas. What can I do to support their work? So here in the United States, I try to connect with indigenous organizations in Mexico and other organizations that I know are getting to the root of the problems of my country and my people, right? And I just try to support. I do whatever they ask me to do. So, I think eventually I feel like I could be very happy just being of service to those movements if I am useful to them. I don't want to just impose myself. Second, I don't think that me being educated or powerful is literally what is gonna, save my country. Because one thing that we know is that we don't really. I think it was Ella Baker who said this. Like, we don't need powerful leaders. We need, ultimately, we believe in a society and a world where is leaderless and leaderful, right? Where you don't need a powerful leader. You don't need that. In fact, I have a lot of opinions about charismatic leaders, right? And how damaging that can be for a movement. If we look at what the Zapatistas are doing, it's very much a process of you lead by obeying. And yeah, man, I think about going over there.
I think it hits me differently and maybe other black folks, black Americans. Depends on what you hear, right? And I've heard like these things, I'm like, well, okay, well, I get it. We haven't got to where we want to be, but you could go back and like to your country too that has similar problems and try to build with them and not like talk about just like our issues here if you wanted to, if that's what you want to do. And so I've always been curious, and also I've been curious but also not sure too, because I'm pretty sure people have done that, right? I'm pretty sure like people have say, hey, I've learned some great organizing and power building, community power building tools here. Let me go back to home and try to implement or do what you're doing. Like you said, how can I support people that are on the grounds locally or find their intersectionality? Because like you said, there's people from Mexico coming into the United States all the time. And so we're the same continent, so.
Yeah, and it's also about strategy, right? So, for example, the town, my hometown in the United States was the birth of one of the most radical, communist labor movements. Why? Because steel was a very valuable resource at that point, right? So, and if you look at the United States, during the labor movement of the 1930s, people focused on three main industries to organize: steel, coal, and auto.
Who had steel? Was it Carnegie? Who had the monopoly on steel? Was it Carnegie or I can't remember.
Rockefeller?
Or it was one of them.
Yeah.
One of them had the monopoly on steel, but yeah.
Yeah. So if you are workers, right? So even when we think about voting. There's so many barriers for our people to actually vote, for immigrants to vote, people with criminal backgrounds to vote. There's all this is the game that they want us to play. But if we, go and also think through other forms of power and other forms of, impact that we can make, we also have our labor, right? So looking at where our people are working and how do we use that to create the disruption that we need to shift power away, right? So maybe my hometown doesn't have that big labor movement anymore because steel is not as relevant as it used to be, but we need to start looking at where are our people and what power do they have? What industries do they have? Do they work in that are powerful industries that disruption makes sense in order to shift power? what is the power that we can generate and really use that.
So now you're in Nashville. It's a lot of shit that just goes on here in Nashville, right? What brought you to Nashville?
Whew. So what brought me to the South was the Mississippi ice raids of 2019.
Okay.
So I don't know if you might be familiar with them, but in August of 2019, ICE kidnapped hundreds of people who were working at 3 major poultry plants. And that created a crisis on a level of a natural disaster.
Wow.
Kids, were dropped in school, and when they leave, when they're ready to be picked up from school, it turns out that ICE took both of their parents or took all of the guardians. So, just kind of imagine how disrupted that is for a community.
Right.
At the same time, when the news came out, people were rushing to donate to a group of 5 organizations that were in Mississippi that supposedly supported immigrants or Latinxes or whatever. And it turns out that none of them were actually connected or led by the community affected. So there was this organization that took note of that, the Southeast Immigrant Rights Network, and they took on the task to bring organizers that were either Indigenous or Latinx that at the very least spoke Spanish, but also people who spoke Indigenous languages. And they just brought us all together. And basically, they were prioritizing people from the South, but they were not enough because the damage was so big.
Right.
So I ended up coming from Massachusetts. They called me, like, you have to be ready and take a plane tomorrow. So I just got all my stuff and I went. And it was a group of 50 or 60 organizers. That was one of the other times where it was a very tragic thing, but I also felt home. And I was deeply impressed by all the work that they were doing here in the South. So most of them were Southern organizers, and our task was to create community-led committees that would then become a grassroots organization. And we did.
Wow. No, I didn't. I've heard about it, but I didn't know like that in depth in it. That's crazy. Just that, and it. You can only just imagine. Just you get out of school and your parents are just not like, they just gone. Like they're being detained and maybe deported, and you just.
Yeah, there were families, neighbors were taking care of 10 kids at a time, all of whom, their parents were in detention.
Right.
And it was a very tragic time. Also, most of them were Mayan. Right. And they were wrongly identified as Latinx, so they were not getting the interpretation and the language justice that they actually need.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot.
So you just said something that just caught my eye. You said they was misidentified as Latinx instead of Mayan. For a regular Joe Blow, it's gonna say, well, like Mayans, they're in Central America. Wouldn't that make them Latinx? Like, so can you break that down, like the difference, so we can be educated on how you can be misidentifying somebody that is Mayan as Latinx and vice versa?
So to understand that, we gotta, deconstruct the false myth of the mestizo, mestices.
Okay.
So that's something that we call, it's a word for mixed race.
Okay.
Which people have come to associate with being Latinx. Or you are Latinx, or you are a blend of a race or races and white.
Okay.
Latinxes, there's always a component of, white supremacy.
Oh.
But folks who are in the Mayan community, like, they are Mayan.
Right.
And they are their own group of people. There are many nations within Mexico. There are many with their own forms of, social arranging and norms and sometimes their own ways of governing themselves.
Right.
So they're a very distinct group of people, and it's actually a violation of international law to not recognize them as the tribes that they come from.
Wow. So another question. I'm just being educated right now. So, background. I've never heard of Latinx until I came back to the United States. Never. People like Latinx. Because again, I was in Costa Rica. I was like, they wasn't using those terms, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know because I was in that country, so everybody's Paraguayan or Costa Rican or whatever. But I didn't hear Latinx, and so I was kind of like, not trying to be. I don't want to offend nobody, but so what do I say, right? We just taking away the O and putting the X, right? Okay, fine, cool. So, would you rather be identified as Latinx or Mexican? If people know, right? If I know, oh, she's from Mexico, okay. Oh, she's Mexican, and saying she's Latinx, or he or she is Guatemalan instead of saying they're Latinx. Do you see people preferring one over the other?
I mean, I think the term Latinx was invented or, put together by queer Chicanxes and queer Latinx folks here in the United States,
right.
Who are also very much Latinx, right? Even if, they're first generation or whatnot, they're very much our people as well.
Right.
And some people in Mexico, or some Latinxes believe that is a type of disrespect to the Spanish language. For that, I will say, okay, so I should respect the Spanish language, but when has the Spanish ever respected me?
Right.
They haven't, right? So I have no respect for the Spanish language. I think we should completely change it up, revamp it. I don't care.
Right.
So I am Latinx. I have indigenous descent, but I am also Latinx as well, right?
Okay.
So I am Mexican. That's the geographic origin. So either of those work.
Okay. Hey.
Yeah, whatever floats your boat.
I'm trying to make sure.
Change it up.
I'm trying to make sure I understand it right. Okay, so I want to get into some Nashville stuff.
Ooh.
And so, Mississippi, Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling about Nashville? What's your thoughts when you first when you first arrived to Nashville? What was your thoughts?
I loved it.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in Western Massachusetts. There were no people of color there. I mean, and it was progressive, and I found my people. But when I, came to Mississippi, and I was suddenly, it was deeply tragic, but I was surrounded by all these Latinx and Indigenous organizers from the South.
Right.
And then I actually come to the South, and I see, I remember seeing one taco stand, and the sign for the taco truck, it was "Ta Contento," which is super cheesy Mexican word, and I was like, oh wow, my people are here and they're comfortable, cause in the Northeast they will have to hide it a little bit more to fit in and assimilate, cause. So I just saw them. I saw my people were here, and they were comfortable and doing their thing. So I loved it.
Right. And so, growing up here, so being a Nashville native, I had no idea there were such a huge community of Latinx. I had no idea.
We're taking over.
Yeah, taking over. But I had no idea because I grew up in my community bubble in North Nashville, which is 99.9% black, right? Well, it's changing now, but growing up, that was the case. So I didn't know. So I was it really put me on notice when Obama came here, and he did a speech at Conexion Americas, I believe. I believe. If I got that wrong, I'm sorry. But that because Nashville is so diverse, right? And I put quotations. I say diversely segregated because we're still in our own little pockets or whatever, right? And so, how is building in the immigrant Latinx community in Nashville?
Whew. It is not easy. I love my people, but
Right.
sometimes they are hard. And, when we are thinking of all of these systems that I just mentioned put in place, that like we
Right.
think that we're all the same, but we're actually not.
Right.
Like, what about Black and Indigenous people from Latin America? That's a whole thing to
Right.
overcome. I think it has been an honor to struggle alongside my community, but I would be lying to say that it was completely easy. No, there's a lot of
What are some of the internal barriers, I guess, that you can kind of think of and name that makes it difficult?
patriarchy, anti-indigenous and anti-Black sentiment. So all those three combined, you put them together, and sometimes it just says that we have a lot of work to do as a community. And
That's funny that you say that, because if I had to pick any other group or community in the United States that I may feel like we should kind of understand like each other the best, right, would be the Latinx community, right? Black and the Latinx. So I would say if any two group of people gonna build, it should be us building together, right? Because
it makes sense.
yeah, it makes sense, right? And so when you say like that anti-Blackness, like can you touch on that a little bit? And the only reason I want you to touch on it a little bit, because I know it's a big thing, and I know it's a big thing living in these, like, in South America and in Central America, knowing that, like, because of the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, put Black folks in those places too, and there's this tension, this thing, right? Like, yeah, we both are from here, but your skin color is a little different than mine, and so there's that colorism that goes into place, right? So can you talk about how that plays here in Nashville a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen in the United States in general is that the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to fully embody the type of world that we want to live in. And to me, that is a world that has transformative justice, and that we can actually heal and see that to other people's traumas as well, right? And take care of each other. I think that one of the obstacles with many immigrant Latinx folks, Indigenous folks, is that they have been victimized when they come to this country. And this victimization doesn't allow them sometimes to hold complexity, especially if they have never faced and grasp and process what they just went through, like what experiences they went through in the detention center, or like what experiences they had when they were exploited by their boss, right? And from their victimization and their self-focus, like they're just looking at themselves. They might look at Black people and say, oh, well, they are citizens. They don't have to deal with what we have to deal. But you don't know this like whole other side of things if you don't get the proper political education. And that when you're struggling with your people on political, with these big concepts and like the history, to get a person to that, vulnerable and safe space where they can, actually absorb the information, also takes some, communication work and being able to listen with intention and listen from the heart and speak from the heart as well.
No, like that's crazy, because again, like if you like, clearly I'm not Latinx that I know of, right? And so I always want to learn and grow what's happening in these communities, just so I can have a better understanding and education. So when something is thrown at me, maybe from somebody from the Latinx community, I can have a better understanding on how to take it, and maybe maybe have a little bit of grasp but don't really understand And so let me try to work that out, right, and not be just offended. What are some of the things that are happening here in Nashville to build that and get rid of some of that anti-blackness, or even that political education and things like that, and to fix that victimization or that trauma that they went through?
I think some of the work, you can look at what the Nashville People's Budget Coalition has been doing, and the work that some members in our community have done to increase the amount of language justice done to these spaces. But I think this is a work that is on the process of being created. I think we have the responsibility to create more of that, because we have seen some instances and experiences of collaboration, but I think that to win a better world for our people, we need to work more on that.
Right.
And that goes from a deep analysis of our practices, whether it's as an organization,
right,
as a community, and do the very mighty but necessary work that needs to happen.
How can we, here in Nashville, what can we do when it comes to multiracial organizing? What can we do to build that? I know, and that's everybody working on themselves, and then this coalition work in general is hard, right? And then multiracial coalition work can be even harder, but I think it's necessary, because we are all affected by what is happening, rooted in white supremacy. What can we do? What are your thoughts on what we can do to move towards multiracial organizing and I don't even know if this is a word, but even I don't know if this is a word, but I'm gonna say it, like multisexual organizing, when we have different sexual identities coming together, getting rid of that homophobia, all of like, what do you see some of the things that we can do to build on that here in Nashville?
I've been thinking a lot about transformative justice recently, and thinking a lot about how to sometimes at workers' dignity even, right? Like, I'm going to point out, is the organization I work for, so,
right.
No one's going to get mad. We focus a lot on the oppressor.
Okay.
That, we're always, a lot of the work that we've done, and this is something that I'm thinking a lot about, that we focus so much on how bad the oppressor is. A lot of our organizing can be quite agitational, and, these direct actions, shaming the boss, that's sometimes necessary.
Right.
And it works. But at the same time, we forget how to nurture our community. So starting to shift that focus to to nurture our relationships, learn how to communicate with each other, and then just, bring in different races and cultures and share ideas and, find points of alignment,
right,
and see how, start seeing each other as a community, right? That can actually, is what makes us powerful. We don't
right,
have the money that, the oppressors have. We don't have
right,
those resources, the dominance of culture.
Right.
We don't have that. Or
right,
what makes us powerful is people,
right,
the numbers. And because of that, it's so important to work on those relationships and start from a point of how to speak and listen from the heart, and how do we find solutions to harm that doesn't necessarily end up in creating just more conflict or more harm.
Right.
And just apply that to, with our own communities. And then one thing that has worked at Workers' Dignity is when we have different folks of different races or different genders speak on their issues as workers, as,
right,
as whatever, and start seeing, oh wow, there are other kinds of problems that I don't experience.
Right.
I am so focused on mine.
Right. And it's hard, because we all have our own self-interest at first, but I think that's important to, one, you have to want to know, right? You have to be intentional about, well, I know somebody probably has it way worse than I have it. What can we do to work together to build both of us, right? And I like that y'all just had that open dialogue to share and give I like to say brave space instead of safe space. A brave space to share because that can be scary. And what I like that you all do at Work with Dignity, like y'all show out and show up, right? And y'all disrupt.
Yes.
And one of the things that you had mentioned earlier, as far as like the Latinx, the immigrant community is what's building this new Nashville. Like literally, right? Literally, like essential workers and all these buildings and all this stuff is going up. And I like that, you all understand that, and if you all say no, we're gonna stop. Like, the city stops, right? Many things stop, and I wish that happened more just amongst like just America in all communities, right? Especially those that are being oppressed, people of color, like.
Stop working.
Yeah, just start working. But that's another facet of things, of like, well, I kind of need this paycheck. I kind of, so it's you, and that's a balance, and you can't say, hey, don't go to work because fight for the collective. Well, my rent due next month, so that's, unless you're gonna subsidize that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do, but I like that you all identified that.
And at the same time, we live in Tennessee. Like, we have the
Right.
worst labor laws in the whole country. And that's because we have the most powerful chamber of commerce in the whole country, or one of the most powerful.
Wow.
So corporate power runs rampant. At the local level, we stopped worrying about policies to pass at the local level for in regards of worker rights or labor standards, because there's nothing that we could really pass that is not preempted already.
Yeah.
We cannot raise the minimum wage through
Right.
public policy. A lot of things that we cannot do. So we started looking at like what industries are our people in that have money or have a power to disrupt, or the
Right.
potential.
Right.
And the construction industry is one of those, right?
Right.
There's a lot of construction being done because of the rapidly gentrifying city that is Nashville and the worst labor laws. So it's the most dangerous city to work in construction. And, we are like, okay, there's a lot of angry people here that we
Right.
can channel that anger into something that leads us to a better, future for our people, a better
Right.
present.
Right.
And, recently we just knew that we had to grow, and we knew that we couldn't pass any public policy. And then we started hearing from a lot of our constituents that they were getting evicted. And this is what led us into the housing work. And, a lot of the people getting displaced are the same workers that are building this city.
Right. Building a city that they can't afford to live in.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Well, look, like, I wish we could keep talking. Like, I wish but I want to bring you back because I think it's some more things I personally want to dig into that's happening. But I want to leave you with the last word of like anything that you want to say to the viewers, to the listeners, about just anything that's next for you, what's coming, what should people be on the lookout for, or just something motivational and inspirational for people to take home with them.
So something nice is that I don't know if you've heard about the Dickerson Road United in Struggle tenant union. They just won a big settlement with the developer, and that's huge because it's the first time, even if it's such a small amount of money for what the developer is gonna make, just the
Right.
fact that we were able to take some of their money and like bring it back, that was amazing. So I feel really, really happy, especially because we're about to write the checks for folks, so they're gonna be seeing the money this week.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's super awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And another thing just in general that I want to share, and I've been thinking a lot about, is envisioning. Sometimes we focus a lot, especially in movement work, or if a person that is, coming into terms with oppression and wants to liberate themselves, we are often focused on what we don't want.
All right.
I am anti-capitalist. I am anti-white supremacy. I am anti-colonialism. But we don't spend enough time thinking of the end goal.
Right.
So how does it look like? How does a world look like that doesn't have all these oppressive systems? How does it look like? What does it have in it?
Right.
So start doing that work is so necessary, you know. And if we're looking at Los Zapatistas, for example, of course they're militarized.
Right.
Of course they disrupt. Of course they do all these things, but
Right.
that's not what they lead with. That's not the main message. The main message is another world is possible, and
Right.
using art to see it, using language to see it, art to see it, any kinds of things that we have at our disposal to really help each other see that better world.
Right.
So all I want to say is that if you really care about community work, if you really care about movement work, like spend some time thinking of how does that look like.
Cecilia, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mucho gracias.